Application Security Weekly delivers interviews and news from the worlds of AppSec, DevOps, and all the other ways people find and fix software flaws. Join us as we explore how the latest news highlights modern security practices or reminds us of the missing ones. We also bring insights from interviews on topics from training to threat modeling, from open source tools to cloud-native techniques, plus an occasional reference from new wave to synthwave. Find us at securityweekly.com/subscribe or look for Application Security Weekly wherever you pick your podcasts.
Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Follow us on LinkedIn for updates across our organization, show highlights, and more. You can find us by searching for Security Weekly Productions. All right, and for this interview, we're talking to Ian Amit, co-founder and CEO at Gomboc.ai. Ian has been active in the security industry for over 20 years, has held leadership positions at Rapid7, Cimpress, Amazon, ZeroFox, and IOActive. He's also very active in the security community. He's the co-founder of the Tel Aviv DEF CON group, a B-Sides Las Vegas board member, and is the creator and co-CEO of the CISO track. Welcome to the show, Ian.
Thank you so much, Adrian. Great to be here.
Yeah, and we've known each other for a while. I think since pretty much since I got into the community. I was in security for a while and didn't do any community stuff. Had never been to a conference for, maybe the first 8 years of my career in security. And then I had a mentor who told me to get on Twitter and to make a brand for myself and go to DEF CON. And I think that's where I first met you, was maybe DEF CON 18 or something like that.
Yeah, probably sound like that. But the story resonates with myself as well. I spent my first few years in security completely unaware even of those conferences. And only, I think it was DEF CON 12, my first one, that I really kind of got introduced to the community aspect of it and the conference circle.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, and I remember, towards the beginning of me starting to go to these conferences, I remember when DerbyCon first started up, you had a whole series of talks called Sexy Defense. And this is an issue that we've dealt with a lot in the industry, where hacking and breaking things and offensive security, is very sexy. You see it in Hollywood, you see it in movies. And even today, apparently that's considered an entry-level field now for people wanting to get into the industry. I don't understand that. But, I appreciated that attempt to make defense more attractive to folks, to try and get folks more interested in defense.
Yeah, I remember that period. Again, it's pretty much everything I do is sort of a work of passion. And, that's kind of the trade secret. If you want to get me to do something, you got to get me emotional about it and kind of get me pissed off a little bit. And again, as someone who grew up from the offensive side of things with a lot of pen testing and red teaming, but also held a few positions on the defensive side, especially in consulting, I realized that the defensive side doesn't get the credit and the, as you said, the sexiness that it does deserve. And I just wanted to highlight, how interesting and challenging defense work in security is, and that there's a way to make it a little more enticing, and not as dull as it might seem when you're just looking at it from, I'm breaking stuff and I don't care. I'm just like honing here and there and getting root on everything. So yeah, that was some good times back then.
So what you're saying is defense is sort of like the dad bod of security?
Totally. It's
the dad bod.
Sorry.
I think part of it is the, defense has a PR problem, because when you're on the defense side and doing cool stuff, oftentimes you're not allowed to talk about it. Whereas when you're on the offensive side, like that's where a lot of consulting firms' marketing comes from, is their pen testers talking about, the cool new tool that they created, or the cool hack that they figured out last week or something like that. They're going to conferences and talking. Much more difficult to get permission to talk about the stuff that you do on the defensive side. Does that sound about right, Ian?
Yeah, that definitely sounds right. There's a PR problem. There's also a context problem and also a skill problem. I mean, again, to be bluntly honest, to be a decent offensive security engineer, sometimes you just kind of stumble on things and it's like, oh, it broke, and that's considered a success. And you can, walk back to a client with it like, look, it's broken. On the defensive side of things, you can't just do that. You have to actually have skills to accomplish something, and oftentimes accomplishing something means that nothing happens, that an attack doesn't happen or doesn't go through the first couple of steps, or that the attacker just kind of gives up and says, you know what, I'm not going to bother with this angle. So there's a combination of both a skill set that requires a much deeper, I think, skill and understanding, especially at the entry levels, when compared to offensive security. And as I said, as you noted, the PR problem, because in defense, when things get a PR, it's pretty much because something failed. So yeah, it's a bad combination.
We talk about script kiddie as a sort of a slur on some of the sometimes younger attackers, but I don't think there's an equivalent like that for a defender.
That's pretty much where I was going. Exactly. You don't need a lot of skills to kind of break into offensive security. That was kind of the stumbling into thing analogy that I gave. In the defensive side, again, you can't just wing it.
It's been meticulous,
because every small mistake that you make is going to be a breach. It's going to be an issue.
Yeah. Yeah, so your path, I think both you and me have had kind of an interesting path through things, have tried out a bunch of different things, but getting into more of a formal CISO role, what was that experience like? After consulting for a while and being on the even whether it was offensive or defensive consulting. What kind of stuff, revelations did you have being in charge for security for an organization after being in the industry for that long?
Right. So for me, it was mostly about having long-term impact. As a consultant, I've had the fortune to work with a lot of different customers, work directly as a trusted advisor to a lot of CISOs, and have high impact in a short amount of time. You break something or you have a project that's very very well scoped, and you can see the immediate impact of that. And what was missing for me is seeing an organization through a change that's not just a project or something very specific or even an application that you're scrutinizing, but really changing the DNA and making sure that security is embedded as part of the business process. So that was kind of the initial driver for me to start working my way towards a full-on CISO position. And that's how kind of I got started working first of all at Amazon, taking over application security, and later on the AWS Nitro stack security, which eventually led to the CISO position at Cimpress, where I took kind of global responsibility for all the 14 businesses under Cimpress, and really led that change. As I said, it's more of a DNA change that is embedded into how the business operates. That was the challenge for me, and to me that really provided a sort of a richer ground for the ability to make an impact, both on the technical side as well as on the kind of cultural business side of the organization.
Yeah, and that was nearly 4 years at Cimpress, so that was a really good run as far as CISOs go. Because of course the challenge there is you want to have a long-term impact, but a lot of CISOs get turned over so often. Each one kind of comes with their pet projects, and if they're out in 6 months or 18 months or 12 months, oftentimes there's not an opportunity to complete that vision or to complete that work, right?
Exactly, and that's again, for me, those 4 years were phenomenal. I was given basically a carte blanche to do whatever I wanted. I had great relationship with the rest of the executive management, with the executive management of each and every business, which is a challenge by itself. So again, 4 years, we've managed to do amazing things over there. Understand the business throughout, and then create a security strategy that is still being implemented to this day in terms of how the security organization works at a highly decentralized organization like Cimpress, where the businesses have the ability to operate almost exclusively, almost completely independently, while having the Cimpress security kind of umbrella protecting them and working with them. So yeah, 4 years was kind of the sweet spot for me. And that's the only reason why I, quote unquote, allowed myself to think about moving on. Because for me, it was obvious that this is not an effective CISO cannot do their job in a span of 1, even 2 years. This is definitely a long-term commitment, and changes that you are implementing have a long-term effect on them, and you want to see it through.
Yeah, so I'm kind of curious, like how does that change life then? After becoming a CISO, like all of a sudden, is that when all the invitations to be on somebody's advisory board or advisory council start coming in? Like how much did that change your career in terms of the way people came to you and all of a sudden wanted to include you with things? Because I'm just going through your LinkedIn here, and I notice there's just this explosion of advisory board member stuff, like immediately after Cimpress.
So it actually started a little before that. It starts with the prominent role at Amazon that kind of draws the attention of vendors and startups, where they want to get some more insights. But yes, definitely once you get an executive position in a public company, the invitations start kind of coming in. I know that the list is long there, but I'm trying to kind of maintain something that's effective and sane. So I'm pretty judicious with who I'm working with, and I'm picking only the ones that I actually like and believe and can make an impact. But yes, that's about the period where you start getting pitched in so many different ways, for advisory board positions, for buying products, services, whatever. I can definitely tell you that my inbox is still suffering till this day.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Like, it's for outsiders to understand. As an advisor, we don't really just when you say believe, right? It's a very simple sounding thing, and it sounds great. But talk a little bit about what does that mean? How do you get that belief in someone? Is this like you see a product, someone just like emails you out of the blue on LinkedIn, you're like, wow, that's amazing, I'm in? Or is it more of a longer term process? Or what does that look like for you?
Yeah, it typically doesn't just end up with a cold LinkedIn pitch. I was like, yeah, that sounds good, I'll jump in. I tend to, the belief has two parts of it. One is the product market fit. So it obviously has to be something that I can value and I can judge from a technical and an efficacy perspective, in terms of what are you bringing to the table, either a product or a service. Do I see the need for it? Have I lived through that? And do I believe in the approach that you're taking? So that's one part. The second part is really a more personal one. Can I be effective working with that person, with a founder, with a founding team? And for me, all of those boxes have to be checked off. So obviously, that's not something that you can accomplish with a kind of 1-2 shot over email or LinkedIn. It definitely requires a little more work to understand who the team is, what the product does, what's the approach, what's the strategy. I typically ask, like, what do you need me for? And be very specific about it. If you want me to connect you to my friends, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to be like your rolodex opener, door opener for you. I'm not good at sales. If you want me to, provide you advice on product market fit, on technology, on the problem domain, on approaches, totally fine. So all of those have to really mend together and work well together for me to take on a position like that. So there's definitely a process, and I like to know exactly what I'm getting into and what is it that this engagement is going to look like.
Yeah. So you say you're not good at sales. So let's get into your role as a co-founder and a CEO. Is that something that came out of this, where you're getting asked to be on advisory boards and things like that? I've recently had my first inbound. Hey, do you want to be a CEO of a startup, or do you want to be a co-founder? So was this something where you were, people suggested to you, hey, you should start your own startup, or was this part of your plan all along, where you wanted to do that at some point, and we're just waiting around to find the right timing, the right market subcategory? How did all that come about?
So, first of all, that's not my first rodeo, as they say. I've already been a founder and an entrepreneur back in 2004. It's already in the blood, so to speak, that kind of entrepreneurial spirit and the need or the drive to do something impactful. And what led me to it is really after I finished my role at Cimpress was try to decide, what is it that I want to do next? Is it another C-level executive role at a big corporate, or go back to entrepreneurship and solve a problem that's kind of a cross-industry issue? I have been, pitched or kind of pushed, and I've been working with a lot of VCs over the past 10 years, and they keep saying, hey, you should open up a startup, you should do this, you should do that. Never really, I listened to everything that I'm being told, but didn't take any action on it. For me, it was mostly a combination of the right timing, kind of finishing a role and having an opportunity to draw my own path forward and figure out what is it that I want to do when I grow up, and really finding a passion project, an area that I was very passionate about, that I saw that the industry does not provide adequate coverage for and good solutions for. And that's how I got into starting off Gomboc. It's not like someone handed me off, hey, here's this company, go manage it. It was really starting from zero, starting from scratch, finding the problem domain, being able to identify it and articulate it, finding a co-founder that, again, it's like marriage. You have to date a few times to find the right match for you. It's someone that you're going to have to work with for the long run and to trust, much like in a family. So that was a big process. And really, as I said at the beginning, to get me to do something, I'm never going to do something that I'm not passionate about, that I'm not really driven to do. So it was really, that kind of after 4 years, reflecting back, finding the areas where I had the most friction and the most frustration, really, in running a global security team across 14 companies. What is it that I saw the most inefficiencies at, and no real solutions to? And that's how we narrowed in on Gomboc. It was that area between security and DevOps. And, if you don't mind me saying, like the classic, still unsolved areas of cloud infrastructure misconfigurations, the same errors coming up again and again and again, and trying to figure out how to correctly solve them. And that's how I started Gomboc.
Yeah, that's I like that, because the good old Twitter rant feels good momentarily, but better to funnel that into something that has more of a lasting impact. Something that has a more lasting effect. Sometimes we create tools, we start projects, stuff in the community, and sometimes it's got to be a whole startup to really make an impact there. So let's jump into Gomboc and what you're doing there. It's not an area that we've talked about a lot on Enterprise Security Weekly, because it's not one that I really understand all that well. And I'm certain maybe John knows a little bit more about this category. I think it's going to be very interesting to him.
Sure. So
Yeah,
the category, I mean, if there is a category, I'm sure that Gartner is working on 12 different versions of acronyms for this, but it's really cloud infrastructure remediation. And the focus is on the actual remediation. It's on delivering something that truly solves a problem. If you probably know that, or I'm happy to kind of educate, but there's a lot of products out there already that can be really good in identifying your misconfigurations, your security issues with your cloud architecture and configurations. However, none of them deliver something tangible for you to fix the problem. They tell you, hey, this is not encrypted, you should encrypt it. This is open, you should close it. But just saying it doesn't mean that it's easy to do. And that's where that friction that I was talking about comes into play. Security has that visibility to know what's wrong. They take that and they open a ticket to DevOps because security doesn't have any impact on actually configuring things nor they should. And DevOps has to do the work. DevOps, on the other hand, gets that ticket, scratches their head, go, all right, what do you want me to do here? Like, you've given me nothing to work with. At most, they would be given some reference implementation or a template or a blueprint or whatever you want to call it. And then comes all the hard work of having to sort of reverse engineer that, figure out what exactly is it that I need to do for this architecture, for this service in my context of how I'm using it. And that takes a lot of work. And that takes a lot of research where they have to go and learn about specific capabilities sometimes of cloud services and how to configure them in that context. All of that work should be gone. It's really toil. It's ineffective. It's not something that DevOps is going to do something with later on. It doesn't help them to get better at their job. And really what we're doing at Gomboc is skipping this entire process from detection, which we can do better than existing security products, all the way to finding the correct deterministic solution for the change that needs to happen in a particular environment for a particular service in the context that it lives in. So we cut all of that. We just deliver that code change at the ISC level, at like basically a diff to your Terraform, CloudFormation, Ansible, whatever it is, so that all that's left on the other side, on the DevOps side, is to get that, review it, make sure that it makes sense, and accept it. So that's really the space that we're operating in. We are, as I said, we're deterministic. We're not statistically correct, or we're not relying on some LLM or ChatGPT like hallucinatory language model. And we need to deliver something that is not just close, but it's accurate for each and every customer's environment. And that's what we do. We just solve those problems instead of pointing at them or finding who to open a ticket for and how to open the ticket.
That sounds very interesting, and I appreciate the overview of Gomboc. The thing that is interesting to me is that, and I've said this before as a person who works in cloud security, that there's thousands of companies that will get you into the cloud, a subset or a much smaller amount that will actually help you secure your cloud. And then, of course, the other thing is, what are the things that you actually need to do based on how you're configured? So I have a couple questions around that. One, what are the specific cloud environments that Gomboc supports? And also, how does the customer, I mean, there's definitely a concern from a customer perspective about something that will automatically fix something. Will it cause problems? Will it lock you out? Will it put something into a situation where there's things that people can't access anymore? Is there a sliding scale based on the impact of that potential change? Are there things that Gomboc will actually identify and go, here are the things that you can go ahead and set the sliding scale to? Low impact changes, go ahead and do them. Medium ones, go ahead and click this button to do them. And then the higher ones, maybe it won't do. So a couple questions specifically about how it handles this, because I'm very interested and curious.
Yeah, no, great questions, and have to clarify. So I'll start with the easy one. As far as cloud environments, we at this point we're just slightly past MVP. We're supporting AWS. In 4 months, we'll do full multi-cloud, including GCP, Azure, as well as Kubernetes. So that's as far as what we're supporting. Before I get into the kind of the details of how those fixes work, let me just say that we would never touch production. So at most, the most damage that we can do is suggest a change to the IAC that's not going to be accepted. So that's just like the premise of what we do. And we only focus on architecture, on infrastructure. All right. So we're not doing anything at runtime. We're not doing anything at the application level. We're just focusing on this, swath of misconfigurations that will keep happening because the cloud keeps changing. You've got new services, modified services, and so on and so forth. To address the second part, which is, again, the most interesting one. As I said, we're not doing anything in production, so there's no way we can lock you out. What we're doing is we're working at the IAC level. We're integrating essentially into your Git repo, where you manage your IAC, your Terraform templates, your CloudFormation, Ansible, and so on and so forth. So much like a managed code approach, think about us as almost like you have a dedicated DevSecOps engineer in every team that will keep committing or providing PRs to your infrastructure as code, where those PRs are designed to essentially implement a security policy on one hand into this particular environment. There's always going to be someone that has to approve that PR and actually accept it. And from that point on, it's really up to you to make sure that you have sane CI/CD pipelines. No one just deploys new code straight to production, right? They go to testing first, and then they go staging, and then they go production. So we're essentially, expecting our customers to have at least a minimal maturity level as far as their DevOps processes, where we kind of slide in and adapt ourselves into that CI/CD DevOps process, suggest those changes, okay, whether through commits or PRs to the code. And then, the process just goes on. Someone reviews it, as I said. Once they accept it, they typically send it off to testing. If something breaks, they would stop it at that point. They would be able to identify that, roll it back, and say, all right, what happened here? Did I miss something? Did Gomboc miss something? Was there a context issue with the way that the remediation was provided? Kind of debug that, solve it, and move on. If everything was fine, then you typically go and run off to staging and production. And the key is really to be part of that CI/CD process so that we're not introducing new friction, we're actually removing friction, removing toil, and fitting into your existing processes.
I want to, sorry, Sean, you're on mute.
Thanks. I have a quick follow-up around that. I appreciate that. So basically, by Gomboc discovering these things and then putting it forward and saying, all right, these are the issues that we've identified. These are the change requests that we're recommending, putting through PRs, et cetera. The customer, as you mentioned, has to have a certain level of maturity to understand what those changes are, those recommendations are, and how to get through that process. How does Gomboc actually help the customer get from a lower level maturity to a higher level of maturity so they can better understand what these pull requests are and the changes that they're making so that they can kind of level up, maybe going from a less mature, less secure type configuration to a more mature, more secure configuration?
Great question. It sounds like you've been, in the room here as we were building the product. So
I've done a lot of cloud security.
It's great, and it's exactly the process that we've been going through as well. And again, coming from the field, working with DevOps, working on the security side, there's no way I would just like drop some random code on someone and tell them, trust me, just accept it. I wouldn't accept that either. So when we push, when we drive a PR or put a commit, we're not just dropping code. We actually document it. So every change that we suggest comes with a documentation that says, this is what we're doing. Like in plain English, we are now enabling encryption on this storage, whatever it is. Why are we doing it? We're enabling storage here because we have a security policy that states that all data at rest must be encrypted. And this is the way that we're encrypting the data. And then we're giving you a reference to the documentation of the actual cloud service that we're affecting. So as a DevOps person, as a developer, you're not just getting here's a diff, accept it because I know best. but here's a diff, here's the reasoning behind it, here's a link to the documentation, so you can test us, and as a byproduct, get some additional education yourselves. Like, one of the feedbacks that we received from initial design partners was a disbelief that a particular change was actually correct. And a day later, a few hours later, they came back to us and said, actually, it works. I didn't know about this and that functionality. I wasn't aware of this type of configuration for this type of service. So a byproduct of the changes that we commit and the documentation that we provide with it is enhanced education, is the ability for a DevOps person to go click the link to the service, go to that particular section and say, oh, I didn't really know that I can connect, I don't know, a KMS managed key to this service and use it to encrypt the data over there. I thought it was like all or nothing, or that I have to kind of roll my own. So in that way, we're doing two things. One is we're gaining the trust, which is a key element in any organization, any product, but we're gaining the trust of both security as well as DevOps people. And two, as I said, the byproduct of leveling up and getting better maturity of those teams.
I want to dig a little deeper in. So first, you got hit with Sean here being the cloud guy, and I'm going to be worse still, Ian. I worked previously at one of the first generation products in this space. I'm thinking of you as Gen 2. It's interesting to see how different customers will use something like this. We actually had some customers who would happily trust those pull requests and just take them straight into prod. So it's always interesting to see how different customers do this. One of the things on your website is you talk about and sorry, I got to do the rainbow hands, artificial intelligence. I'd love to hear a little bit about, like, right, this is sort of a crowded space, or at least it used to be. There's been some acquisitions. What are you guys doing this different? How is the machine learning being used in there? What's the secret sauce you're bringing into this for the customers to look at you guys?
Great question. Again, I hate the use basically of the term AI. And I'm very wary about presenting Gomboc as an AI company. However, we do use AI. So let me start with what we're not doing. And I think I mentioned it briefly before. We're not using LLM. We're not using Chat GPT or GPT even per se to generate those remediations. The way that we're using AI is, and again, I'm not going to unveil all the secret sauce, but we've got a couple of areas that we're focused on using AI. They're mostly related to inference learning, to inference implementations of going through the cloud provider documentation, and through that understanding per service, what are the capabilities that are being offered, what are the configuration options, and how they affect that service in the context of every other service that it can interact with. So that's the first implementation of AI that we're using. Again, inference one, and we're creating a huge knowledge graph that represents the perfect understanding of the cloud, essentially. Every service and how it can interact and affect every other service. The second part where we're implementing AI is in a deterministic engine that essentially solves for a policy gap. So we start with the customer's architecture as our blueprint, as kind of like, this is what we need to solve for. We take into account, and again, we're using some inference engines there to understand what is the customer trying to achieve with this architecture. How are things built and connected? And we're using that as a blueprint that we're not going to break. Once we have that and we model that again into another graph, we apply basically the policy onto it. And we're doing a simple question, like, if the policy states something, does your architecture currently implement that statement, that requirement? If it does not, then what we do is almost solve a simple regression mathematical formula. Which is essentially, what is the shortest path from the existing graph to a graph that does meet the policy requirement? Once we solve that, it's a matter of finding the correct implementation in code to accomplish that, whether it's changing existing connection between nodes or even adding new nodes. So in our implementation, we can add new services to your architecture to accomplish a certain requirement.
Interesting. So whereas as I'm calling them, the first gen products, we're using something like Rego to build up really a rule set of like a security group should not have 0.0.0 allow for SSH. You guys are doing a more I'll say intelligent version of that. If I heard you right in the first part of that answer, it sounds like the first set of inferences you're building, the first engine you're building is basically learning off reading from the documentation. So does that mean if someone like let's talk about CloudFormation, if they've got like errors or bugs in their documentation, does that end up then in your corpus, or how does that work out? Is that the sort of the troubleshooting you're going through now?
Yeah, so the first part really refers to the cloud service providers documentation. So we're going through the AWS documentation, the GCP, the Azure documentation on a nightly basis. The reason that we do that is we want to have. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, I'm sorry that you're having to do that on a nightly basis. Some of that documentation is a tough read.
Look, don't be sorry. This is some machine doing it. So there's no humans involved in in forcing someone to go through documentation. And trust me, I worked at AWS. Jonathan, my co-founder, worked there. I have yet to meet anyone that could master each and every service in the cloud. And that's exactly the problem. That's why I think that it's much more appropriate to build an algorithm to do that for you and to create those inferences automatically for you. So that's what we're doing. We're not really looking at a customer's CloudFormation documentation. We're looking at a customer's CloudFormation architecture to understand what they're doing. By having the prior knowledge of each and every service from the CSP perspective, then we allow ourselves to say, well, this is wrong. So hopefully that kind of give you a better context of our application of those inference engines.
No, that's really interesting. I wonder, do you think, and I'm going a little off, but now I've just caught my interest, is that going to make it more or less difficult for you to add other languages over time?
So it actually makes it easier, because we're not building for a particular cloud provider. We're not building for a particular IAC language. We're building an engine that is fairly generic. So moving, and again, timeline for us, all right? We've gone from 0 to MVP in 6-7 months. From MVP and MVP supports just one cloud, AWS. From MVP to support multi-cloud, we're on the road to make that in 4 months now. So it's not even a linear progression, and we're adding 2 more cloud providers and Kubernetes configuration. So once you build the engine correctly, unleashing it on additional cloud environments, or the other side of the engine, which is the IAC, which is obviously closely coupled with the cloud environments. Once you build that correctly, moving from just supporting Terraform to supporting Terraform and CloudFormation, and then to supporting Ansible and Pulumi and Chef, again, not even linear. It's almost logarithmic growth.
Yeah, so I haven't mentioned one of the reasons that we pulled you in here is we noticed, I think this is the first year Blackhat's doing their startup spotlight, which is structured very similar to the innovation sandbox that RSA has been doing for 15 years or so. And except instead of a top 10, there's a top 4, and you're in that top 4. So that's where we kind of picked you for the show. We're looking at the vendors in there that were interesting, and what's that? Give us an idea of where you are. I think you were founded last year, like where you are in the whole startup cycle process.
Right. So I think it's at least the second year that Blackhat is holding the startup spotlight. And there's definitely one of our portfolio companies from SVCI already participated in last year. So at least 2 years running. We were founded last year, mid-year. We got funding in November. So we've been running funded since November, where I could actually start paying myself and hire employees. So we're fairly early in our journey, and it's it's cool that you ask, because initially I'm the self-doubting type, when someone pointed me towards the startup spotlight competition at Blackhat, I was like, we're barely 6 months old. Like, what?
Yeah.
How can I apply to this thing? But honestly, we had such phenomenal traction. We work really, really well with our design partners, and we just managed to run fairly fast and get to an MVP in 6 months that put us in the position to make some waves, I guess, and actually have something to present, and in a field that is pretty much untouched. There's only 2 other companies that I know of that can actually claim to deliver remediations at the ISE level. So you got that combination with the fact that we managed to move so quickly and get some feedback from early design partners that indicate that yes, this is your approach is correct. You're delivering remediations that matter and that solve a real problem is probably what put us as a finalist at the Startup Spotlight.
So I assume you'll have a presence there. Are you doing something with some of your investors, or I assume with the Startup Spotlight you get a booth for at least a day or so? Is that true?
Yeah, we're again, this was all sort of last minute. We didn't really plan on having booths, and I mean, me, we've been having those discussions offline for a while. I'm not a big believer in booths at security conferences, but yeah, we got a booth for all the time that the business hall is open. We're in Startup City. We're going to be on stage and providing a 10-minute pitch or kind of presentation on what we're doing. So yeah, we'll have full presence there. We're also coinciding our official launch out of stealth for Blackhat. So we're also having a small kind of launch event on Wednesday afternoon in the evening.
Awesome. I won't be there. I don't know if John, Sean, I don't know if either of you are gonna go out to Blackhat.
I will be out in Vegas for Hacker Summer Camp for Blackhat and DEF CON, so I will definitely stop by the booth and say hi.
Awesome.
Oh, looking forward to it, definitely.
All right, great stuff, Ian. Thanks for sharing with us. It's been great having you on the show today. Anything else to add before we wrap up?
No, I think that was it. Great questions. Really appreciate it, especially the deep dive into kind of the different areas of AI and the hand waving of AI and the actual work that can be put in. And as I said, we're going to be at Blackhat. Stop by the booth and sign up to join our little whiskey tasting event. It's all on the website, Gomboc.ai. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for being here. All right, and that's it for this interview. Stick around, and we're actually pre-recording this, so I'm not sure what to say. I think this might be the last segment. So yeah, if you're hearing this, we will come back at you next week, and I think with some Blackhat content, some interviews from Blackhat. See you then.